49 years. I've been asked to introduce one of our most treasured Rotarians, Bob Stevens. Bob has been here since I have been here, and his attendance of 100% is 54 years. Is that correct, Bob?
56.
56 years.
He just adds a couple of years every year.
Wow. I'll never be able to catch you. So, with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Bob Stevens, our longest tenured.
It's going to be a short presentation.
It looks like it's going to be a long presentation. He's got notes.
Came prepared.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Let me start by saying Rotary's been a part of my life for a good many years. I started out in high school. I graduated in 1951. The senior year, our Rotary Club in Huntington had a program where each of the seniors had a chance to come for 1 month and be a Rotarian. So I was called a Junior Rotarian for 1 month. Joined the club, stayed and went to every meeting on Tuesday noon. I found out what Rotary was. Back then, it was a bunch of movers and shakers. People got into Rotary because they wanted to help. They were community-based. People worked on various things. I was really impressed. In my later years, I decided this is what I wanted to be. Well, it took a while. After I graduated from high school, I spent 1 year going to Purdue. I wanted to become an engineer, I thought. Found out that wasn't for me. My family were all architects. My great uncle was an architect, started the business in Huntington. My father took over the business in 1920. So I decided I was going to become an architect. I transferred from Purdue to Cornell in 1953, and I spent 3 years there before the Army decided they wanted me. So I spent 2 years traveling overseas in the Army. I went in basic training in Fort Linwood, Missouri, spent 8 weeks there, stayed another 8 weeks and became a combat engineer. I became a carpenter, which is not very much to do with being an architect. They shipped me overseas one day after Thanksgiving in 1954. Rather than going to Korea, this is in the Korean War time, they shipped me to Europe. I spent 18 months in Bonhomie, Germany. This is a small area west of Frankfurt, about an hour and a half. This was the main headquarters of Rommel. He had concrete barracks, 3 stories high, central heat, which we took over. It was a very good time in Europe. I cannot complain. You people really took care of me. I came back in the middle of the summer of 57, went back to school another year, came back home, decided that I didn't want to be single anymore. So I married the girl that I've been going with for 7 years through high school, during the service. I went overseas, or went back to school with her the next year and a half, and graduated as an architect with a 5-year degree. After that, I came back home. I really wanted to go overseas and do some excavating in the Holy Land, but family matters determined I would come back home and take over the business. So after 2 years of working in the business, I got my degree, and in 1951, I took over the business. From there, in 1951 also, I was working with the bankers in town, and they decided that they needed to have an architect in the business and Rotary also. So I was nominated for Rotary in June of 61, 10 years after I'd been a Junior Rotarian. I joined Rotary in 1961 and been a Rotarian ever since, of course. I spent a lot of time with Rotary doing various things. After the first 2 years, I became a Sergeant of Arms for the next 30 years. It was a different sergeant than we have here. What we did, the sergeant was the one that set up the club and then took things down after the meeting was over. During the middle of it, I had a tenure of 2 years as secretary. Don't ever want to become secretary. That was not fun.
Thank you, Cindy.
When I was in the in Rotary, pardon me, I decided what my businesses were. Back then, the Rotarians were all, thank you, specialized. Of course, there was no women Rotarians back then either. Each Rotarian has a prime Rotarian, and then we had a backup, or they call it the second. I didn't have a second in the college or in the architect field, so I was the only one then. The main people that I dealt with in Rotary were bankers, lawyers, business people. This was my main place where I got clients. It was a very, very good thing to do back then. Rotary was very kind to me in the fact that everybody kind of worked around as a small town, and they kept all the businesses local. There was 65 Rotarians in my our club, expanded eventually to about 85, and we had several businesses of various things that we worked on. Most of my clients initially came from Rotary. It was a very lucrative thing for me. I have no complaint for working with Rotaries or the clients at all. Back then, this was one of the major things that Rotarians did. They intermingled completely with their own people. My firm was a small firm. It started out with 2 people. I graduated, or gradually got up to 7 people with 4 architects, a couple draftsmen, secretary, bookkeeper. It kept me busy. If you've been in business, you know you've got to go out and keep on the bushes hunting for more work all the time. So my main business things were commercial work. I did not do many residential things. I spent a lot of time working at banks, churches, governmental buildings such as county farms and things like that. Back in Indiana, we had they called it a poor farm. And we had a county farm, and I spent a lot of time remodeling that for the county government. I did a lot of HUD work, built several HUD projects for senior citizens. They had a old hotel, which I converted, pardon me, from a hotel into senior living. Had about 28 to 32 units in there. One of my major parts was working with a group of retarded people. They were Farmington was about 16,000 people, and we had a group of seniors and people that were graduating from high school or getting out of high school. And the parents of these people were worried about what were going to happen to their offspring after they graduated, or after the parents were gone. So we set up a new organization and started a factory outlet training center where everybody that was qualified would come in. We would train them to go out into the business world and work. After we got them started on the business world, pardon me, I got caught. So anyway, then we decided what we're going to do with them when they get old enough that they cannot stay at home because the parents are gone. So we started group housing. We designed houses that would take about 6 to 8 clients. We would staff it with a older couple that would take care of them, feed them, and they would work in the factories, pay rent to the housing, and live there. So it was a ongoing proposition. This was one of the boards I was on. I was on several different boards. From there, I did other work such as jails, schools, churches. I was quite busy. After that, I retired in 1995 after 35 years at age 62. Decided to come to Florida and live and not work too hard. It didn't work out that way. My family. I have 2 boys and a girl. The boys are 57 and 59. The girl's 55. They're all older. I have 8 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren. So I get up north once in a while to take care of them. The boys were very active as youth. They were Boy Scouts, both of them. And I'm very proud to say they both became Eagle Scouts, which is a very good thing at that time, back then. With that, I ended up to be an assistant scoutmaster for about 5 years. Had nothing else to do. It didn't work that way anyway. From there, they are all married, like I say, have grandkids. My hobbies are sailing. I like to be involved in IndyCar racing. One of my hobbies was going to the car races for years and years. And I found out that a friend of mine was involved with Pravimi Veal as a party manager for that branch of the business, which is racing. They asked me if I wanted to join, and I did. I couldn't say no to anything, I guess. And we became part of the IndyCar racing team. I knew Andretti's, Unsers, a lot of the Ray Hall, and a lot of the racers. Our team actually won 2 Indy 500s. Ari Lyondike was the man who won at 2 different times. That was quite, we did a lot of traveling with them. Another part of my hobbies is traveling. Bought a camper and decided to, after retiring, to see part of the world in the States. So we traveled all the West a lot of times. My last hobby is I'm a numismatist. Does everybody know what that is?
Coins.
You've got it. I'm a coin collector. So that is basically who I am and what I've been doing. The last 5 or 10 years now, I've spent a lot of time with my church doing repair work, keeping the place put together. We have a small team of ex-workers that we would spend Wednesday morning working over at the church, putting it back together after everybody tears it apart. Which, it happens, we're a pretty good sized church with a lot of youth, and they decide that they don't like the way it's put together, so we rebuilt it. Any questions?
What is the name of the IndyCar one?
The name of what?
What do you mean with the IndyCar, the two?
As IndyCar was the Ari Leyendijk,
Oh,
was the guy that was the winner.
I missed
It was
that.
Provimi Veal was the name of the sponsoring company.
What's your most prized coin, Bob?
Pardon?
What's your best coin?
My best
Your
coin?
most prized?
Probably a $20 gold piece.
Is
It's a kind of a rare one. Worth quite a bit of money.
I shouldn't say that in front of
You
you.
have it on?
You're gonna have a tough time getting to it though.
You remember where it's buried?
I know what bank it's buried in.
So did you, all your business was in Indiana, did you say?
Huntington.
Your business was in Indiana?
Yes,
Huntington.
I have, well, my father, well, it's my great uncle started the business in 1897. My father took over the business in 1920. Then I took over the business in 1961. And it's been, before I sold it, we'd had almost 100 years in the operation, which is a long time for any architectural business. Sold it to one of my partners, and he kept it open for about 5 years, but he actually died, so his business died too.
What's the, sorry, you go ahead.
Go ahead.
What's, because you are so experienced in so many dimensions of life, can you comment on the role of technology
Oh,
on both on your professional life in the past and your personal or Rotary life now?
professionally, technology put me out of business.
Oh,
Back in 1995, the computer was coming in, of course, and was really becoming quite active. They were starting to come up with a CAD system. And at age 62, I decided I was not going to learn the CAD system, so I retired.
and what about phones and the internet in your social and personal life?
Most of my time was spent, actually I spent a lot of time on different boards. I was on about 4 or 5 different boards. I ended up being in the American Institute of Architecture, AIA. I had a Northern India chapter which I helped to set up. Had a sub-chapter which was IFRA, which was a part of the, they called it the Interfaith Council on Architecture in faith and architecture. I actually did about 6 or 7 different churches with 6 or 7 different denominations. So it's a very interesting thing. The different denominations are quite different, and you learn a lot about various forms of religion. All the same place, they all want to go the same place, but they want to get there a lot of different ways.
Wow.
So Bob, you've got 56 years of perfect attendance. That gave you an opportunity to make up clubs around the country, maybe around the world. Was there any club that stood out as far as one of the most unique experiences that you've had making up different clubs?
Not really. Rotary clubs that I found were pretty much, well, back until into the 70s and 80s, pretty much standard. They had a bunch of rules which this club pretty much follows all of them. Had a lot of interesting people I met, but anything special, I can't remember anything that was really hit me as I want to go back to that club over the club I was in. This club is by far the best one that I've ever been in, so that's where we are.
So, a follow on to that, what advice would you give to us Rotarians, making up and 100% attendance?
What does
what's
it
the,
take?
The driver?
It just takes an attitude that I want to find out what that club is and what are they doing. And if it's something different than my home club and it's good, I want to take that information back and give the club a chance to think about doing something like that. One of the things that I really thought of our home club, my home club, was the Junior Rotarian. It is a chance to get a student, back then it was a male student, involved in Rotary and thinking about joining a club when he becomes old enough and in a profession. It's not going to change unless we get a lot of young people in here. Speaking from a guy that's way, way over the top of the hill, get young people and get a lot of them.
You've seen, Rotary has changed quite a bit. Most of us in this room have not been in a Rotary club where there have been a strict classification system. And you spoke about the old days of Rotary was the classification.
Oh, yes.
And where you got your business was with the people within your club trading in there, and Rotary's kind of lost its way or forgotten about all of that. What are your thoughts on that? Should that come back?
I thought it was a very good part of Rotary to have a strict classification. I used it. That was my contacts to do work. We had members of ice cream plants. I did ice cream plants. We had bankers. I did bankers. I did banks. We had clergy. I did church work. They had a couple of priests. I did Catholic work first. Them too. So it was a broad aspect. I did a nunnery for a bunch of nuns in our town. So it's a very wide thing, and I think service is a good thing, and it's part of Rotary. It was not the base part when I was a new Rotarian. I would like to see a combination of a strict club with Rotary as a two-member party
Classification.
to particularly crafts and service branch as well.
But at what point did it change?
It wasn't a break, it just evolved. It changed from strictly a club where, I was just thinking, my first Rotary meeting after I joined, I walked in, saw a seat, thought I'd sit down. I sat down, the guy tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Say, son, you're sitting in my seat." I said, "Oh, sorry." It happened to be the editor of the local paper. I worked for him later on. So it's a thing where it changed over the long period. I cannot say that it was a gradual change, but I saw it coming, and I was glad to see some of the changes, and I'm happy to see others. Glad to see women join Rotary. I think it's a very good thing. We had a women's branch of Rotary called 8sep in Indiana. They didn't call it Rotary, of course, but they did exactly the same thing Rotarians did, but they were all women. And those kind of joined when the whole thing came together. Any other questions?
No, when I joined Rotary, that was 1952, sorry, 2002.
That was your birth date.
No, we had classifications, they were insistent on the classification. And you couldn't, they didn't want another person of the same classification in. There was no other editor, of course, or journalist. But then it gradually just disappeared. The thing used to be on the old riser, and they just disappeared from the
Well,
classification.
I think what happened was those classifications were being manipulated, like they had 4 lawyers.
That's
and
true.
They weren't called lawyers anymore, they were called a defense attorney or.
Yeah, right.
Real estate,
Environmental
drugs.
attorney.
Right, you're right, yeah.
You know, they had a major classification and then they changed the.
So, became blurred, very blurred.
Dental,
Very blurred,
you know,
yeah.
extraction expert or something, you know, they changed all their things and
That's
it
true.
became meaningless, if you will.
That's true.
And then they said, well, you can have 5 in any classification or 5% of your club.
And there was a thing-
Whatever,
To get more members in too, obviously.
absolutely.
That
They
was
didn't
another-
want to turn anybody down.
That was another reason, yeah.
You know, you
But I
lose a
agree.
lot of good Rotarians by not letting them in.
Well, Paul Harris started it as the way Bob was describing it, you know, the classifications were strong.
That was the idea that you rotated through somebody's business and that's why the business was so important to Rotary.
True.
I think
Any
there's,
other questions?
I think there's a big change too, when the IRS code changed and businesses couldn't claim deduction. Remember, we lost a couple members that were bankers. because
That's right.
Banks wouldn't reimburse their dues and so.
Yeah, some of them
No
won't.
longer allowable.
Yeah.
under the code.
They
So,
wanted
I mean,
the-
I can't do that?
They wanted
can.
their business.
Hey, Bob.
Whatever you want to put it in.
When was this photograph taken?
Oh my heavens. I have no idea.
Who was that?
Is
I
it
don't
you?
even recognize him.
Good looking guy.
Could everyone please thank Bob Steven? Wonderful.